The cold bit through her thin jacket as she stood outside the glass windows of Le Petit Chateau. Her stomach growled so loudly she was sure everyone passing by could hear it. 3 days. It had been 3 days since her last real meal, and the smell of freshly baked bread and roasted meat wafting from the restaurant was almost too much to bear. She watched the people inside, all dressed in fine clothes, laughing and talking as they enjoyed their expensive dinners. The restaurant sparkled with crystal glasses and polished silverware under warm golden lights. It looked like another world compared to the darkening street where she stood, but it wasn't the food that truly caught her eye. It was the piano. A beautiful grand piano sat in the corner of the dining room, its black surface gleaming. No one was playing it. The sight of those silent keys pulled at her heart more strongly than even her hunger. Her fingers twitched at her sides. How long had it been since she'd touched a real piano? The community center where she used to practice had closed months ago. Since then, she'd been reduced to tapping out silent melodies on tabletops or drawing keyboard patterns on foggy windows. "Move along, miss," a voice startled her. A security guard from the nearby shop gave her a stern look. "You're making the customers nervous." She nodded and stepped away from the window, but didn't leave. Instead, she walked around to the front entrance of the restaurant, smoothing down her wrinkled clothes as best she could and tucking loose strands of hair behind her ears. Before she could change her mind, she pulled open the heavy door and stepped inside. The warmth hit her first, along with the full force of the delicious smells. Then came the sounds: clinking glasses, soft conversation, and distant laughter. A few heads turned to look at her, and she saw the flash of judgment in their eyes as they took in her appearance before turning away. A tall man in a crisp black suit approached her, one eyebrow raised slightly. His name tag read, "Head server. Can I help you?" His tone suggested she had wandered into the wrong place, which, by all accounts, she had. She cleared her throat. "I was wondering—" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She straightened her shoulders and tried again. "I notice your piano isn't being used tonight." The head server glanced toward the instrument, then back at her. "Our regular pianist is on vacation this week. Did you have a reservation?" His expression made it clear he knew she didn't. "No, She took a deep breath and forced the words out before her courage failed. "May I play for a piece of food?" There was a moment of silence before a soft snicker came from a nearby waiter who had paused to listen. The head server's mouth twitched as though fighting a smile. "You want to play our piano in exchange for food?" Each pause in his question dripped with disbelief. She nodded, her cheeks burning with shame but her chin still up. The head server exchanged glances with the other staff members who had gathered nearby, clearly amused by the unusual request. One of them whispered something that made the others laugh quietly. "Let her play, Henri," called a voice from behind the counter. An older man with gray hair and a chef's coat had emerged from the kitchen. "What's the harm? If she's terrible, we'll know in 30 seconds, and that'll be the end of it." Henri looked like he wanted to object, but instead gave a small shrug. "Very well, one song. If the customers complain, you stop immediately." He gestured toward the piano with a flourish that seemed partly mocking. "The kitchen can spare some soup and bread if you don't drive everyone away." She nodded, trying not to show how her heart leaped at the prospect of both food and music in the same evening. As she made her way through the tables, she felt eyes following her. Conversations quieted as diners noticed her worn shoes and faded clothes moving toward the expensive instrument. Is this entertainment or charity? She heard someone whisper as she passed. Another voice replied, "Probably can't even play chopsticks." She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment, running her fingertips lightly across its polished surface. Even before sitting, she could tell it was perfectly maintained, a professional instrument for professional musicians, not for hungry strangers off the street. She sat down carefully on the bench, adjusting its height with practiced hands. This simple, familiar action already felt like coming home. She took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys, and closed her eyes. What to play? Something to match the atmosphere of wealth and refinement? Or something to express what she was feeling? In the end, her fingers decided for her. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor flowed from her fingers. She started softly, almost tentatively, as though the piano was a wild animal she was getting to know. The gentle opening melody filled the restaurant, and she sensed rather than saw several people look up from their meals. As the piece progressed, her confidence grew. The music began to tell her story, the gentle beginning giving way to more complex emotions, building gradually in intensity. Her fingers remembered every note, every subtle change in tempo and volume. This piece had been her companion through many dark nights, and playing it now felt like speaking her truth. When she reached the more demanding sections, her whole body became part of the performance. Years of training took over. Her hands flew across the keys, drawing sounds from the instrument that filled every corner of the room. The powerful crescendos and delicate pianissimos conveyed everything she couldn't say in words: her struggles, her dreams, her refusal to give up despite everything. She forgot about her hunger. Forgot about the restaurant and the people watching. Forgot about everything except the conversation between her fingers and the keys. She poured herself into the music, giving the performance everything she had. As she neared the dramatic conclusion, she finally opened her eyes and was startled to see that the restaurant had fallen completely silent. Every face was turned toward her. Servers stood frozen in place, holding trays of food. The chef had emerged from the kitchen and stood with arms crossed, watching intently. Even the people at the bar had swiveled on their stools to listen. She finished the piece with the thunderous final chords, letting the last notes hang in the air before lifting her hands from the keys. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then the room erupted in applause. Startled, she half rose from the bench, unsure what to do. This wasn't a concert hall. She hadn't expected this reaction. The head server who had snickered at her request was now standing with his mouth slightly open. The chef was nodding with a satisfied smile. And the customers, they were standing up from their tables, clapping enthusiastically. An older woman at a nearby table wiped a tear from her eye. "Magnificent," she said to her companion. "I haven't heard it played like that since Warsaw." The chef approached her, no longer looking amused but impressed. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked over the continuing applause. She swallowed hard, suddenly aware again of how hungry she was. "I studied at the conservatory," she said simply, "before everything changed." The head server appeared beside the chef, looking thoroughly embarrassed by his earlier behavior. "That was extraordinary," he admitted. "Please come with me. Any meal you want on the house." "Just soup and bread would be wonderful," she said softly. "That was our agreement." The chef shook his head firmly. "Agreements change when circumstances change. You didn't just play for food. You gave our customers something special tonight." As she was led to a small table near the kitchen, she noticed the diners watching her with new eyes. No longer seeing her shabby clothes or unwashed hair, but looking at her with respect and curiosity. A few nodded to her as she passed. The head server seated her with the same formality he would show to his wealthiest customers. "My name is Henri," he said, properly introducing himself this time. "And I believe we need to talk about something more permanent than a single meal." While she waited for her food, she noticed a well-dressed man at a corner table watching her with particular interest. He scribbled something on a business card before standing up and making his way toward her table. Her stomach growled again, but for the first time in months, she felt something else alongside her hunger. Something she had almost forgotten. Hope. The well-dressed man approached her table with careful steps, as though afraid she might flee if he moved too quickly. She noticed his polished shoes first, then the expensive cut of his suit. People like him didn't usually talk to people like her. Not anymore, anyway. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle but confident. "I hope I'm not interrupting your meal." She shook her head, still a bit dazed by how quickly her evening had changed. Just moments ago, she had been standing outside in the cold, and now she sat at a table with a crisp white cloth, waiting for food that would be given freely rather than in grudging exchange. "My name is Thomas Reed," he said, placing a business card on the table beside her. "I'm the director of the City Symphony Orchestra." Her heart skipped. Everyone in the music world knew that name. "I was having dinner with friends when you began to play." He gestured toward a table where 3 elegantly dressed people watched their conversation with interest. "May I join you for a moment?" She nodded, suddenly conscious of how she must look and smell after days on the streets. But if he noticed, he gave no sign as he sat down across from her.
"Your Chopin was—" He paused, seeming to search for the right word. "It was honest. Technical perfection is common enough these days, but what you played had soul. Where did you study?" The National Conservatory, she replied quietly. I was there for 6 years. His eyebrows rose slightly. Under Professor Klein? She nodded again. Why aren't you performing professionally? The question was direct but not unkind. Someone with your talent. Before she could answer, Henry appeared with a steaming bowl of soup, a basket of bread still warm from the oven, and a small plate of butter shaped like roses. The rich aroma made her dizzy with hunger, but she forced herself to remember her manners, especially in front of someone like Thomas Reed. Please, Reed said, noticing her hesitation. Eat while we talk. I don't mind at all. She broke off a piece of bread, dipped it into the soup, and took a small bite. The flavors exploded in her mouth, a perfect blend of vegetables, herbs, and slow-cooked meat. It took all her willpower not to devour everything at once. Between careful spoonfuls of soup, she told him her story. How her parents had sacrificed everything for her education. How Professor Klein had taken a special interest in her development, arranging scholarships and opportunities. How she had been preparing for an international competition that could have launched her career when tragedy struck. My parents died within months of each other, she explained, keeping her voice steady with effort. Cancer for Mom, then heart failure for Dad, though the doctor said it might have been heartbreak too. They'd been together since they were 16. Reed listened without interrupting, his eyes kind but not pitying. The medical bills took everything, she continued. I had to leave school just months before graduation. I tried to find work, but she gestured vaguely at herself. It's hard to get a normal job when you've spent your whole life studying piano, and performing jobs are rare without connections or a degree. So you've been on the streets? Not the whole time. I stayed with friends until I couldn't anymore. Worked odd jobs. Played in subway stations until my keyboard was stolen. The last few months have been challenging. This was an understatement, but pride kept her from saying more. Reed nodded thoughtfully. And yet you still play like that? It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Music is the only thing that makes sense anymore. I practice in my head when I can't find a piano. I tap rhythms on my knees while riding the bus. Sometimes I sneak into the music store to play for a few minutes before they ask me to leave. Henri returned to refill her water glass, his manner completely transformed from their first interaction. Our guest will have dessert as well, Reed told him. And perhaps some tea? Of course, sir. Right away. Henry hurried off, clearly eager to please the well-known director. Reed turned back to her. I have a proposition for you. She tensed slightly. In her experience, the propositions from wealthy men rarely ended well for women in desperate situations. Noticing her reaction, Reed quickly added, a professional one. We're hosting a showcase of young talent next month. One of our pianists had to withdraw due to injury. After hearing you play tonight, I believe you would be a perfect replacement. She nearly choked on her bread. You want me to perform? With the City Symphony? It's one piece. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Challenging but well within your capabilities based on what I heard tonight. Her mind raced. Rachmaninoff was one of her favorites, and she had performed parts of that very concerto during her studies. But that was before, when she had access to a piano for hours of daily practice, when she was well-fed and well-rested, when her hands weren't roughened by street life. I can't, she said reluctantly. I have nowhere to practice. No proper clothes. Nowhere to live. I can't prepare for a performance like that under these conditions. Reed considered her words, then leaned forward. What if those obstacles were removed? The chef appeared then, carrying a delicate dessert, a small chocolate soufflé with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting beside it. He set it down with a flourish. I couldn't help overhearing, the chef said. My name is Philippe, and I own this restaurant. He glanced at Reed, then back to her. We have a small apartment above the restaurant. It's nothing fancy, just a bedroom, bathroom, and sitting area. It's meant for visiting chefs, but it's empty now and for the next few months. You're welcome to stay there. She stared at him in disbelief. Why would you offer that to a complete stranger? Philippe shrugged. Music and food are cousins, both feed the soul. Besides, you brought something special to my restaurant tonight. I'd like to return the favor. He nodded toward the piano. And perhaps you could play for us sometimes. When you're not practicing for your big performance, of course. She looked from Philippe to Reed, waiting for the catch, the hidden cost that would reveal this all to be a cruel joke. but their faces remained open, sincere. "There's a practice room at the symphony hall you can use during the day," Reed added. "And regarding proper concert attire, my wife is on the board of the Symphony Women's League. They maintain a collection of performance clothes precisely for situations like this. They would be honored to help." Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "I don't understand why you would do all this," Reed smiled gently. "Because talent like yours deserves a chance. And because 20 years ago someone did the same for me when I was at my lowest point." He pushed his business card closer to her. "Sleep on it. Call me tomorrow if you're interested." Philippe placed a key on the table beside the business card. "The apartment is yours regardless of what you decide about the performance. Consider it payment for tonight's music." As they spoke, she noticed the restaurant had begun to empty. The last customers were putting on coats and gathering purses. But rather than leaving immediately, several of them walked over to the piano and placed bills in the small tip jar that Henri had discreetly set there after her performance. One elderly gentleman placed a folded note on top. "Looks like you have some fans already," Reed observed with a smile. After they left, Henri guided her to a small door at the back of the restaurant and up a narrow staircase. The apartment was indeed small but spotlessly clean, with a comfortable-looking bed, a tiny bathroom with fluffy towels, and a sitting area with a bookshelf and an old armchair. On a small desk by the window sat a surprise, a digital keyboard with headphones. "Philippe thought you might want this," Henri explained, looking slightly embarrassed about their earlier interaction. "It's not a grand piano, but it might help with practicing quietly." When he left, she sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. From starving on the street to having a place to stay, food in her stomach, and the chance to perform with a prestigious orchestra, it seemed impossible. She picked up Reed's card and Philippe's key, holding them like precious treasures. Part of her wanted to run before it all disappeared, before these people realized their mistake and took back their kindness. Instead, she moved to the digital keyboard and put on the headphones. Her fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's concerto, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. The familiar music filled her head, drowning out the doubts. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her life wasn't over. That the music that had sustained her through her darkest days might yet lead her back into the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, in this small room above a restaurant where strangers had become supporters, she dared to dream again. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, waking her from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The soft bed beneath her felt strange after so many nights on park benches and in shelter cots. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. The piano, the applause, the unexpected kindness. She sat up slowly, half expecting to find herself back on the streets. The whole experience nothing but a cruel dream. But the small apartment was real. The digital keyboard still sat on the desk. Thomas Reed's business card and Philippe's key rested on the nightstand. A gentle knock on the door made her jump. "Hello?" a woman's voice called. "I've brought some breakfast if you're awake." She quickly ran her fingers through her tangled hair and straightened her rumpled clothes before opening the door. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes stood there holding a tray. "Good morning," the woman said warmly. "I'm Nora, Philippe's wife. I help run the restaurant." She lifted the tray slightly. "May I come in? I've brought coffee and croissants." "Thank you," she replied, stepping back to allow Nora into the small apartment. "That's very kind." Nora set the tray on the desk beside the keyboard. "Philippe told me about your playing last night. He said it moved several guests to tears." She smiled. "My husband is not easily impressed when it comes to the arts. He believes cooking is the superior form of expression." Despite herself, she laughed. "Well, based on the soup I had last night, he might be right." Nora's gaze traveled over her worn clothes and the small plastic bag in the corner that contained all her remaining possessions. "I hope you don't mind, but I've brought a few things you might need." She gestured toward the hallway, where a small stack of items waited: towels, a toothbrush still in its packaging, a hairbrush, soap, and what appeared to be folded clothes. "These were my daughter's," Nora explained, bringing in the clothes. "She's away at university now." "You look to be about her size." The kindness was almost too much. She felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you all. I never expected." Nora waved away her thanks. Musicians and restaurant people, we understand struggle. Most of us have been where you are at some point. She paused, then added gently, "The bathroom has hot water if you'd like to shower. Take your time. There's no rush." After Nora left, she sat staring at the small feast before her. Still warm croissants, butter, jam, a bowl of fresh fruit, and a steaming mug of coffee with cream. Beside the tray was a small vase containing a single yellow flower. These simple gestures of human kindness threatened to undo her completely. She forced herself to eat slowly, savoring each bite, though her instincts screamed at her to devour everything immediately. Who knew when her luck might change again, when these strangers might realize their mistake and send her back to the streets. After breakfast, she showered, the hot water soothing muscles that had been tense for months. The borrowed clothes fit well enough. Jeans, a simple blue sweater, clean socks. Such ordinary things that she had once taken for granted. As she toweled her hair dry, her eyes fell on Reed's business card. Should she call? The idea of performing with the City Symphony seemed absurd, a fairy tale ending she didn't deserve. And yet, before she could talk herself out of it, she picked up the small phone in the apartment and dialed the number. Thomas Reed speaking. His voice was just as she remembered, calm, authoritative, kind. This is... She realized she hadn't told him her name last night, had never introduced herself to anyone at the restaurant. Months of invisibility had made her forget the most basic social customs. "This is the pianist. From Le Petit Chateau last night." "Ah." The warmth in his voice was immediate. "I'm glad you called. Have you considered my offer?" "I have." She took a deep breath. "I'm interested, but I'm still not sure I can prepare adequately in such a short time. It's been months since I've practiced properly." "I understand your concerns," Reed replied, "but I have faith in your abilities. Would you be willing to come to the Symphony Hall today? We can assess where you are with the piece and make a plan from there. No pressure, just a starting point." 2 hours later, she found herself walking into the imposing City Symphony Hall, clutching a small bag with the few sheets of music she had managed to keep through her hardships. The main entrance, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, was intimidating, but Reed had instructed her to use the artist's entrance at the back, a simpler doorway that led directly backstage. A security guard checked her name against a list. Reed had asked for it during their phone conversation and directed her to rehearsal room B. The hallways were a maze of activity, musicians carrying instrument cases, staff rushing about with clipboards, the distant sound of an orchestra tuning up. She paused outside rehearsal room B, her heart pounding. What if this was a mistake? What if she sat down at the piano and discovered her fingers no longer remembered how to fly across the keys? What if Reed realized she was a waste of his time? You going in or just admiring the door? The voice startled her. She turned to find an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp but not unkind behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'm supposed to meet Mr. Reed." The woman nodded. "He's waiting inside." "Go on then. Pianos don't bite, though some of our conductors do." She winked and continued down the hallway. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. The rehearsal room was smaller than she expected, but beautifully equipped. A grand piano stood in the center, its lid propped open. Reed sat in a chair nearby, making notes on a score. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "You came. Excellent." He stood and extended his hand. "Before we begin, I realize we've skipped an important formality. I know your story, but not your name." She took his hand, surprised by how steady her own felt. "My name is Lily," she said. "Lily Chen." "Well, Lily Chen," Reed gestured toward the piano. "Shall we see where you stand with Rachmaninoff?" She set her bag down and approached the instrument with reverence. This was a professional piano, kept in perfect condition, the kind she had once taken for granted during her years at the conservatory. She sat on the bench, adjusting its height, and placed her hands on the keys without pressing them, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingers. "Whenever you're ready," Reed said, sitting back down with his score. "Play as much as you remember. Don't worry about mistakes." Lily closed her eyes for a moment, summoning the music from her memory. Then she began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the room, those famous dark bell-like tones that set the stage for one of classical music's most beloved works. She started tentatively, her fingers remembering the pathways but lacking their former confidence. As she continued, though, muscle memory took over. The music flowed more naturally, building in intensity as the first movement progressed. There were mistakes, missed notes, phrases where her timing faltered, sections where her technique couldn't quite match the demands of the piece after months without proper practice. But the essence was there. The soul of the music still lived in her hands. When she finished the first movement, she stopped, slightly out of breath, hands trembling a little from the exertion and emotion. Reed was silent for a long moment. Then he set his score aside and leaned forward. "You need work," he said bluntly. "Your technique has suffered as expected. But the foundation is strong, very strong. With intensive practice, you could be ready in time for the showcase." "How intensive?" she asked. 4 to 6 hours daily. "I'd like you to work with Dr. Wen, our resident piano coach, 3 times a week. She's tough but brilliant. The woman you met in the hallway, actually." He checked his calendar. "Can you start tomorrow morning at 9? Tomorrow, a concept that had lost meaning during her months of survival, when each day was only about making it to the next. Now tomorrow held purpose again. Structure, music. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "I can start tomorrow." As they discussed logistics, practice room schedules, coaching sessions, access to the building, Lily felt a strange sensation spreading through her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It was hope. Not the desperate hope of finding shelter from rain or enough change for a meal. This was different. The hope of returning to herself, to the person she had been before tragedy struck. The person she might still become. When she left the symphony hall that afternoon, the city looked different somehow. The same street she had wandered as a homeless person now seemed full of possibility rather than threat. The same sky that had often been her only shelter now stretched above her like a promise. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Weeks of grueling practice awaited her. The physical and emotional demands of returning to serious musicianship after such a fall would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But as she walked back toward Le Petit Chateau and her temporary home above it, Lily Chen held her head higher than she had in months. One step at a time, one note at a time, she would rebuild her life through music. The one thing that had never completely abandoned her, even in her darkest hours. 2 weeks into her new routine, Lily's fingers bled. Not visibly. There were no dramatic drops of red on the ivory keys. But she could feel the raw places beneath her fingertips where calluses had once been. Those protective layers had softened during her months away from regular practice, and now her skin was paying the price of her return. Dr. Wen noticed immediately when Lily winced during a particularly demanding passage of the Rachmaninoff concerto. "Stop," the older woman commanded, raising one hand. "Show me your hands." Lily reluctantly extended her hands, palms down. Dr. Wen took them in her own, turning them over to examine the fingertips with a critical eye. "As I suspected," she muttered. "You're pushing too hard, too quickly." "I don't have a choice," Lily protested. "The showcase is in 2 weeks. I need to be ready." Dr. Wen fixed her with a stern look. "You won't be ready at all if you damage your hands. Take the rest of today off. Soak them in warm salt water, then apply this." She rummaged in her bag and produced a small tin of salve. "It's my own mixture. Works wonders for pianist problems, but no arguments. Music is not just in the fingers, you know. Go home and study the score mentally. Visualize your performance. Sometimes the best practice happens away from the instrument." Reluctantly, Lily gathered her things and left the rehearsal room. As the door closed behind her, she heard Dr. Wen begin playing the very passage that had been giving her trouble, but with an effortless grace that made Lily's heart sink. Would she ever play like that again? Outside, rain fell in sheets, matching her mood. She'd forgotten her umbrella at Felipe's restaurant, so she pulled her borrowed coat tight around her shoulders and ran toward the bus stop. The borrowed clothes from Nora had been supplemented by a few second-hand items purchased with the tips she'd earned playing piano during dinner service at Le Petit Chateau. Not much, but enough to give her a sense of dignity she'd been missing. The bus was crowded with afternoon commuters, their faces buried in phones or staring blankly ahead. No one looked at her twice. A stark contrast to just weeks ago when her disheveled appearance had drawn stares or deliberate avoidance. Now she was just another face in the crowd. Invisible in a different way. When Lily returned to the small apartment above the restaurant, she found a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was elegant but clearly masculine. Miss Chen, a package arrived for you. It's at the front desk. Philippe, curious, she went downstairs. The restaurant was in the quiet lull between lunch and dinner service, with staff setting tables and prepping for the evening. Philippe stood at the host stand examining reservation lists. "Ah, there you are," he said when he spotted her. "This came for you." He handed her a large flat package wrapped in brown paper. "For me? But who would—" No one knew she was here except the people at the symphony and the restaurant staff. Philippe shrugged. The delivery person didn't say. "Perhaps a secret admirer impressed by your playing?" Lily took the package upstairs, her sore fingers making it awkward to carry. Once inside her apartment, she carefully unwrapped it, mindful of her tender fingertips. Inside was a leather portfolio, expensive and well-made. Opening it, she gasped. There, carefully preserved, was a complete copy of the Rachmaninoff concerto score. But not just any edition. This was the rare Schirmer edition with performance notes from the composer himself, translated into English. These scores were almost impossible to find outside university libraries. A note fell out, written on symphony stationery. Thought this might help. It belonged to my teacher, who studied with a student of Rachmaninoff himself. The notes in the margins might give you some insights. Borrow it as long as you need. T. Reed. Lily sat on her bed, carefully turning the pages of the score. Penciled notes filled the margins, little insights into tempo changes, pedal techniques, emotional intentions. This was a treasure worth far more than its monetary value. She studied it for hours, forgetting her sore hands, absorbing the wisdom of musicians who had lived and died long before she was born. When she finally looked up, the room had grown dark. She switched on a lamp and noticed the small tin Dr. Wen had given her. Dutifully, she soaked her hands in warm salt water before applying the salve, which smelled of herbs and something she couldn't quite identify. As she massaged it into her fingertips, she thought about how much had changed in such a short time, from starving on the street to preparing for a performance with one of the country's most prestigious orchestras, from invisibility to having people who cared whether her hands hurt. It seemed impossible, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. The next morning, her hands felt better. Not fully healed, but the raw tenderness had subsided. Dr. Wen's miracle salve had worked its magic. When Lily arrived at the rehearsal room, the piano coach was already there, listening to a recording of the concerto with her eyes closed. "Much better," Dr. Wen said when Lily entered, though she hadn't even looked at her hands yet. "Your face is less pinched today. Pain distracts from the music, you know." The day's practice went more smoothly. Lily's fingers moved with greater confidence, and the passages that had troubled her now flowed more naturally. The score Reed had lent her had given her new insights into the composer's intentions, helping her connect emotionally with the piece in ways she hadn't before. "Good," Dr. Wen said after Lily played through the second movement. "Not perfect, but good. There's humanity in your playing today. That's what we need. Not just correct notes, but something that makes the audience feel." By the end of the week, Lily had mastered most of the technical challenges of the piece. Her hands had toughened again, building new calluses to protect her fingers. Her body, too, had changed. Proper meals and regular sleep had restored some of the weight she'd lost during her months on the streets. Her face looked less hollow, her eyes brighter. One evening, after the restaurant had closed, she sat at the grand piano in the dining room, playing not Rachmaninoff but Debussy, gentle, flowing pieces that soothed rather than challenged. Philippe sat nearby sipping a glass of wine after the long dinner service. "You know," he said during a pause between pieces, "when you first walked in here asking to play for food, I thought Henri was right to laugh. We get all types in this business, people looking for handouts, for attention. I let you play mostly to teach Henri a lesson in humility." He smiled. "I didn't expect to be the one learning the lesson." Lily rested her hands on the keys. What lesson was that? Never to judge someone by their circumstances. Behind every person down on their luck is a story worth hearing. He raised his glass slightly, and sometimes extraordinary talent. "I was very lucky," Lily said softly, "that you were here, that Mr. Reed was dining that night. Most people in my situation never get such a chance." Felipe considered this, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but luck favors the prepared, no? Even at your lowest, you kept your music. You had the courage to ask for a chance to play, Many would have given up. Before she could respond, the door from the kitchen opened and Nora appeared, carrying a small cake with a single candle. "What's this?" Lily asked, surprised. "A celebration," Nora replied, setting the cake on the piano lid. "It's been 1 month since you came to us. 1 month of having beautiful music in our restaurant every evening. We thought that deserved some acknowledgement." Lily felt tears prick at her eyes. A month. It seemed both longer and shorter, as if she'd been here forever and yet as if that desperate night had just happened. The memory of standing outside in the cold, stomach cramping with hunger, was still vivid enough to make her shudder. "Make a wish," Felipe said, nodding toward the candle. Lily closed her eyes. What should she wish for? Success at the upcoming showcase seemed too obvious. Health, happiness, a permanent solution to her housing situation. All important, yes, but somehow not capturing the fullness of what she wanted. In the end, she wished for courage. Courage to keep moving forward, to rebuild her life note by note, day by day. Courage to accept both the kindness of strangers and the results of her own hard work. Courage to play with her whole heart, regardless of the outcome. She blew out the candle, and Felipe and Nora applauded as if she'd just finished a concerto. Later, back in her small apartment, Lily stood by the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there were the streets she'd walked as a homeless person, the parks where she'd slept, the places where she'd nearly given up hope. They were still there, still part of her story. But now there were new places too, the symphony hall, this restaurant, this room. New people who had become something like family in the strangest of ways. New possibilities stretching before her like blank sheet music, waiting to be filled. In 1 week, she would perform with the City Symphony Orchestra. In 1 week, her life could change again, for better or worse. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Lily turned from the window and sat at her digital keyboard, putting on headphones so as not to disturb the restaurant below. Her fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's concerto without hesitation. Strong, sure, ready for whatever came next. The day of the showcase arrived with the kind of perfect weather that seemed like a good omen. Clear blue skies, gentle sunshine, a light breeze that carried the scent of blooming flowers from the park across from Symphony Hall. Lily stood at her window early that morning, watching the city wake up. Her stomach in knots. Tonight she would either reclaim her place in the world of music or fall short in front of hundreds of people, including critics, musicians, and potential sponsors. The thought made her hands tremble slightly as she sipped her tea. A knock on her door startled her. It was barely 7 in the morning. Who would be visiting at this hour? She opened the door to find Nora standing there holding a garment bag. "Good morning," Nora said cheerfully. "I hope I didn't wake you, but I wanted to catch you before you left for your final rehearsal." "I've been up for hours," Lily admitted. "Too nervous to sleep." Nora nodded sympathetically. "That's to be expected. But I have something that might help." She held out the garment bag. "The Symphony Women's League sent this over last night. For your performance." Curious, Lily took the bag and unzipped it. Inside was a concert dress, elegant but not flashy, in a deep blue that reminded her of twilight. The fabric was expensive, flowing silk that would catch the light beautifully on stage. It's perfect," Lily whispered, running her fingers over the material. "There's more," Nora said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a small velvet box. "These belonged to my grandmother. She was a violinist with the symphony, many years ago. I thought you might like to wear them tonight." Inside the box was a pair of simple pearl earrings, classic and understated. "I can't accept these," Lily protested. "They're family heirlooms." "I'm not giving them to you," Nora clarified with a smile. "Just lending them for good luck. Music was my grandmother's life, as it is yours. She would have approved." Lily carefully took the box, touched beyond words by this gesture. "Thank you. I'll take good care of them." "I know you will." Nora checked her watch. "Now Felipe has made you a proper breakfast. You'll need your strength today. Come down when you're ready." The final rehearsal that morning was with the full orchestra. Lily had practiced with smaller sections over the past week, but this would be the first complete run-through. As she walked onto the stage, the scale of what she was undertaking hit her anew. 50 professional musicians waited, instruments ready, watching her with curious eyes. Thomas Reed stood at the conductor's podium, his expression encouraging. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lily Chen, Our soloist for tonight's Rachmaninoff. As I mentioned, she's stepping in on short notice, so let's give her our full support. The orchestra members tapped their stands with their bows, a musician's form of applause. The concertmaster, a stern-looking man with salt and pepper hair, gave her a slight nod. Lily sat at the grand piano, adjusting the bench, trying to calm her racing heart. This was different from playing alone in a rehearsal room, different even from playing at the restaurant. These people were her peers, or would have been if her life hadn't taken its tragic turn. "Ready when you are," Reed said softly. Lily took a deep breath and nodded. Reed raised his baton and the orchestra began the dark, brooding introduction to the concerto. When the moment came for the piano to enter, Lily's hands moved with a confidence that surprised even her. The countless hours of practice had embedded the music into her muscles, into her very being. As she played, the outside world fell away. There was only the piano, the orchestra, and the beautiful architecture of Rachmaninoff's creation. Her fingers found every note, every nuance. When the first movement ended, there was a moment of silence before Reed lowered his baton. "Magnificent," he said simply. Several orchestra members murmured in agreement. The concertmaster caught her eye and gave her a more definite nod. Approval earned, not merely granted. The rest of the rehearsal went smoothly. A few small adjustments to timing, some fine-tuning of dynamics, but nothing major. When they finished, Reed dismissed the orchestra but asked Lily to stay behind. "How do you feel?" he asked when the others had gone. "Terrified," she answered honestly. "But ready, I think," he smiled. "Good. A little terror keeps us sharp." He paused, studying her face. "You know, regardless of how tonight goes, this isn't the end. It's a beginning." "What do you mean?" "I mean that talent like yours doesn't go unnoticed in our world. People are already talking. Whatever happens tonight, doors will open." His words stayed with her as she left the hall, as she rested in the afternoon, as she returned early that evening to prepare, as she put on the beautiful dress and Nora's pearl earrings, as she looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman who looked back at her. Composed, elegant, a far cry from the desperate person who had asked to play for food just a month ago. Philippe and Nora had reserved front-row seats. Dr. Wen would be there too. These people who had become her unlikely family, witnessing this pivotal moment in her rebirth. Backstage was organized chaos, musicians tuning instruments, stagehands making last-minute adjustments, the low buzz of an audience finding their seats. Lily waited in a small room offstage, going through the piece in her mind, her fingers silently tracing patterns on her knees. A stagehand knocked on her door. 5 minutes, Miss Chen. 5 minutes until she would walk out in front of a sold-out concert hall. 5 minutes until everything changed. Again. She closed her eyes, remembering where she had been just a month ago. The cold, the hunger, the despair. She remembered standing outside Le Petit Chateau, looking in at the piano, gathering the courage to ask for that chance. "May I play for a piece of food?" Such a simple question that had altered the course of her life. A second knock. "It's time, Miss Chen." Lily stood, smoothed her dress, and followed the stagehand through the winding backstage corridors. She could hear the orchestra finishing their opening piece, the applause that followed. Then Reed's voice, though she couldn't make out the words, introducing her, she assumed. More applause, polite and expectant. The stagehand nodded to her. "That's your cue." Lily walked onto the stage into the bright lights. The applause grew louder as she made her way to the piano. She caught a glimpse of Philippe and Nora in the front row, their faces proud. Dr. Wen sat a few rows back. Her usual stern expression softened into something like hope. The audience quieted as Lily sat at the piano. Reed looked at her, waiting for her signal. She took one deep breath, nodded, and the journey began. The familiar notes flowed from her fingers, but something was different tonight. She wasn't just playing the piece, she was telling her story through Rachmaninoff's music. Every note carried the weight of her experiences, her losses, her struggles, her unexpected redemption. When she reached the powerful climax of the first movement, she felt tears spring to her eyes, but her hands never faltered. This was why she had held on to music through everything, because in these moments, playing these notes, she was fully alive. The audience was utterly silent between movements, drawn into the emotional world she was creating. In the second movement, so lyrical and introspective, she poured out her gratitude for the second chance she'd been given. And in the famous third movement, with its driving energy and triumphant conclusion, she played with a fierce joy that seemed to lift the entire hall. When the final chord sounded, there was a heartbeat of perfect silence before the audience erupted. They rose to their feet as one, applause thundering through the hall. Reed was beaming as he extended his hand to help her rise for her bow. The ovation continued as she bowed, first to the audience, then to the orchestra behind her, who were applauding as enthusiastically as the crowd. Flowers appeared, a massive bouquet handed to her by the concertmaster himself, his earlier reserve replaced by genuine admiration. As she took her second bow, Lily caught sight of Philippe and Nora in the front row. Philippe had his arm around his wife, who was wiping away tears. Dr. Wen was standing with the rest of the audience, her usual composure broken by a wide smile. 3 curtain calls later, Lily finally made her way backstage where Reed was waiting. "I told you," he said simply. "A beginning, not an end." Later that night, after the reception, after the congratulations from musicians and critics and audience members, after declining several dinner invitations in favor of a quiet celebration with Philippe, Nora, and Dr. Wen back at the restaurant, Lily returned to her small apartment above Le Petit Chateau. She carefully hung up the beautiful dress and placed Nora's pearl earrings back in their velvet box. On her desk sat a stack of business cards from people she'd met that night: conductors, artist managers, festival directors, opportunities, possibilities. Her old life was gone, and she had made peace with that. But this new life that had emerged from the ashes of the old one, this life had potential she was only beginning to understand. Lily moved to the window and looked out at the city lights, so similar to the view she'd had a month ago. Yet everything had changed. Out there were still people struggling as she had struggled, fighting to survive, to hold on to their dreams despite everything. She couldn't help them all. But perhaps her story, if it became known, might offer hope. Perhaps her music might reach someone who needed it, the way music had sustained her through her darkest days. Lily turned from the window, a new resolution forming in her mind. She would play. She would succeed. And when she did, she would find ways to extend to others the same lifeline that had been thrown to her when she had gathered her courage and asked, "May I play for a piece of food?"